if somebody were to ask you at a coffee shop or a bar or whatever who you are, we can start there. And I want to hear your answer to the question. We'll just see where it unfolds.
Who am I? Great open-ended, non-specific, leave it up for interpretation kind of
Yeah.
question. Who am
Uh-huh.
I? How deep do you want to go? At a surface level, I am somebody who came from tech. I'm somebody who now has built a brand around themselves. I built a large podcast. I have a great business newsletter. So really focused on business, entrepreneurship. These are kind of the things that I've done over my whole career. And now I build a community and create content around that. I think that who I am as an individual is somebody who works really hard, is really ambitious, is is understanding that the season that I'm at in my life is a difficult season because I'm still trying to build, but I'm still somebody that in my future wants balance and doesn't really want to work nonstop till the day that I die. So I'm giving a lot to what I'm doing right now and the projects that I'm working on. But I also hope that with the projects that I'm working on, it can teach other entrepreneurs maybe some quicker ways to get to where they want to go so that they don't have to fail and spin their wheels and reinvent the wheel. And they can learn from hopefully myself and some of the people that I interview. And that's really where I'm at right now.
I love it, man. Hell yeah. Let's get into that then. So, what are you up to right now? You want to help entrepreneurs? What are the current projects looking like?
Yeah. So what is, I I've been an entrepreneur and I've been an operator in a business. So in my past life, you know, go back about 4 or 5 years ago and beyond, I was building businesses. So I was building tech businesses, software businesses. My last company was acquired almost now 5 years ago, which was a B2B enterprise software product. And basically what it did very briefly was we took a whole bunch of stuff that you could use in a news control room. So like switching from cameras, camera A to camera B, switching from broadcaster A or anchor A to anchor B and doing all of the control room stuff, but we put it into the cloud and we were selling that to broadcasters. So that was the most recent company that I've built that was not completely my own, right? I had somebody who was leading product. He was a CEO and then a CTO, and the three of us together were putting this company together. We built it up, and then it was sold just after COVID. Before that, I had done some consulting work which I hated, by the way. I absolutely hated the consulting work I was doing, which is actually why I ended up sort of going full tilt and all in on this one particular company because I was consulting with tons of different companies on sales and marketing strategy. That was really my bread and butter. That was my sweet spot. So I was working with companies at incubators, companies that were part of Futurepreneur, Creative Destruction Lab, which is an incubator at the University of Toronto. And I was helping really smart founders who were engineers or PhDs or think of any kind of founder that isn't a sales and marketing founder, figure out how to take their product to market, how to find their first 50 customers, how to find product market fit, how to identify their ICP, ideal customer profile or persona, and buyer persona, and really help them get their companies off the ground because they're very technical companies, but they didn't really understand how to bring a product to market. I also worked with non-technical companies as well, but the point was there was a lot of consulting work, hated it, but still loved working around entrepreneurs, which is what sort of led me to where I'm at right now. So while I was building that last B2B enterprise software company, I started building a podcast. I started thinking, okay, this is going to have an expiry date on it. This company will eventually be acquired. And when it's acquired, I'm going to have to start from scratch. And I didn't want to have to start from scratch. And I was a student and I studied the Gary V's of the world and all the prolific marketing thought leaders because that's really how I learned to do what I do. And I saw the way for Gary in particular was very smart about it. He built a community and an audience, and then he launched companies against that audience. And I
Mm.
thought, well, that's smart. That's super smart. So I knew his journey, and I knew that he put probably about 10 to 15 years of energy building whatever his multi-million follower audience. And then he would launch, Vayner Empathy Wines and Vayner Sports and his speaking bureau and all these different companies. And he could get these companies off the ground immediately because he had this audience. So I'm like, listen, that's a really smart play. I want to do the same thing. I'm not starting a company yet for myself, but I know that in the future, if I have this audience, it's going to be a lot easier, right, to get things off the ground. It's going to solve the take to market problem. It's going to allow me to test ideas without putting tons of money and energy and time in because I already have people that will give me feedback, and not only just give me feedback, but could be customers. So the thought process was I have to create content. I have to build an audience and a community. What is a type of content that I like to create? Well, I like to create content focused on entrepreneurship, on sales, on marketing and business. And I found that the best way to create that content was to interview people that have done it before. Because I could put content out myself based on my own experience, but I also know that nobody, when I first started, is searching for Scott Clary, how to do this. But if I interview Guy Kawasaki on how to create the perfect customer for your business, who was one of the first employees at Apple, that would be interesting to people. So that was sort of the impetus. That was the place where the podcast started. I've been doing it for over 6 years now. Uh, I've done about 500 episodes, tens of millions of downloads, and I've built a community, social newsletter on the back of this podcast. And that's it's probably given me more opportunity than I realized in terms of like speaking
Mm.
gigs, book opportunities, networking with people that, I mean, people that I have in the phone in front of me are absolutely wild. I've gone to dinner with the co-founder of Reebok, Joe Foster, 3 or 4 times now. It's like, it's absolutely wild the network you can build when you use this as a medium to create content for yourself. And I guess the other benefit that I didn't realize was I was in it for the long term. I was in it for, you know, 10, 15, 20 years from now. So I wasn't trying to sell anything to these people. I was trying to build relationships with these people. And I think that's actually another really smart sort of bit of wisdom and advice. When you do want to network properly, you cannot network with the intention of doing a transaction immediately because it's not authentic and genuine. So when you do want to build relationships with people, and I've discovered this through what we're doing right now, if you just get to know somebody, if you just approach the interaction as a like a normal, uh, real human being with nothing to gain and no ulterior motives, you'll realize that you build an incredible network that in the future, maybe those people that you know are useful, maybe not, it doesn't matter. But the point is, that's the mindset that I went into every conversation. And this is why it's been so useful for me, not even on purpose. And the opportunities have been immense. So that is very, very quickly the story of career, podcast, where I've come from, what I'm doing now.
I love it, man. Podcasting's leverage is all hell. That's what I love about it. You can repurpose the
Mhm.
content, you meet folks, which is my primary purpose for it. And then, you use the content that's generated in all sorts of different ways. Newsletters, short piece, long
Well,
piece.
that is the other piece too, right? Like
Right.
I didn't even mention that, but when I thought about how do I build an audience and a community, I wanted scalable. I wanted something
Yes.
that would be easy to put out every single week. And I also wanted to find a way to touch every single medium. So you just nailed it. You nailed my thought process when I started, and it's long form content turned into 50 pieces of derivative content, including tweets, newsletters, graphics, short form, whatever, all of it. And it's just a very sustainable, scalable content medium, which allows you to do it for a ridiculously long period of time because you don't have to burn yourself out, or you don't have to spend, 10, 20, 30, 40, $50,000 every single month on people, on agencies to create content across all your
Yeah.
mediums, but you can still get something everywhere. And one of the things that I truly believe in is to be successful at anything. I've seen this play out again and again and again and again. You have to build systems and find a way, not just mentally, but with financially, with your SOPs, with how you operate. You have to find a way to do that thing for an unreasonable amount of time, and that's when you will
Mm.
achieve success, as long as you learn from your failures, your mistakes, and you iterate and you improve. But the point is, most people don't fail because uh because they've made a mistake. They fail because they have not found a way to do the thing for an unreasonable amount of time,
Mm.
whether or
Mm.
not they run out of money or they burn out or whatever it is. So I applied this to my podcast. I apply this concept to businesses that I've built, businesses that I've invested in, founders that I've mentored. I've seen this concept applied in past businesses that I've been a part of that are more of the startup, not like the huge enterprise, but the startup phase. Obviously, if you join a Fortune 500, you're not going to see this in action. But all the exits that I've been a part of, it's been around a 10 to 12-year mark in the market when you finally get to the point where you can sell a business for a meaningful amount of money. So that means the lesson is, how do you find a way to stay in the game for that period of time?
Right. And you look at it from a long-term point of view, man. You know, I look at it like the content that we make as a result of these podcasts, that's secondary. Primary to me are the relationships that are being built and the
Mhm.
opportunities that stem off the back of those. It's
Yeah,
so fucking leveraged, man. I love the podcast. You meet all kinds of fascinating people, and
100%, dude.
it's ridiculous, dude. I love it. What about your process for outreach? You know, how do you get people, especially at the beginning? What was your process for getting folks on?
Yeah. So I came from a sales and marketing background, so it was very simple for me. The podcast was the product. Let me explain what that means. When I came from a sales background, that means that I have to understand who is the decision maker, what is the pain point, what is the subject line in the email, the cold email that's going to get an open rate, and then what's the copy in the email that's going to get them to reply or book a meeting. Like, I mean, that's overly simplified, but ultimately that is outbound sales 101. And the other side of it, the marketing side would be, okay, what content am I pushing out on social that's going to attract people, or what content do I have on my website? So when people do get that email, they do a little bit of research, they feel comfortable that I am who I say I am, or my company can do what it says it's going to do, and I'm going to reply back and speak to this salesperson or this account manager or this BDR or SDR. So that's sort of where I came from. And to get somebody on your podcast, it's no different. Your podcast is the product. The guest is the decision maker. The agency would be the gatekeeper if they have an agency or a VA or an EA. So you have to understand, okay, I have to do a couple things. I have to figure out who the who the decision maker is, which kind of guest I want to bring on. I have to figure out how to get their contact information, and there's like a million and one tools that can do that for you. It's not hard to find someone's email address anymore, anyone in the world. And then what's the strategy to get them to open the email? So maybe to open the email, I'm going to say, come on my podcast. We have X, how many downloads, but that wouldn't work at the beginning. So I would usually leverage big names that have previously been on. So I would leverage at least my personal connections to bring a big name on, and I'd put them in the subject line of the email, which would at least get it opened. Because obviously people want to see if I've had a Guy Kawasaki on or a Grant Cardone on. Well, obviously this is not some Mickey Mouse operation. He's found a way to get these big names on. I want to see a little bit more. I don't want to miss out on this opportunity, right? So you put that in the subject line. Another great subject line, by the way, that always works, if it's not a celebrity or thought leader's name in the subject line, especially for podcasts, is to put how many downloads you get. Or one of my favorites that always has this 30 to 40% open rate is my name with my phone number in it. And that's it. And
Interesting.
it always gets an open rate, and it just shows that you're a real person, and you're like, we're going to figure something out, we're going to do a deal. If you want to talk to me, this is my actual personal cell. And I've done that for products, I've done that for podcast guests, and it's always worked out super well. Which a 30 to 40% open rate is, by all standards, quite good. Obviously you can probably finesse it up to 50 if you're incredible and you have your messaging dialed in, but that's pretty good for most people that struggle to get like a 10 to 15% or 10 to 20% open rate.
Well, because it
Anyways,
doesn't look like
so
marketing, right? See, that's the
it
difference. You're
doesn't look like
scrolling through your
marketing.
feed and like, bam, it sticks out. It's not marketing here. My favorite one is either their first name with a question mark, because it's, yeah, it's kind of marketing, but it's also, it works, it's a high
Yeah.
open from that. But really what I love is using AI to analyze somebody's social media. I did this with you, for
Mm,
example. This is how I got in contact with you. I had AI analyze everything that you've ever done, everything you've written online, and understand you. I look at it as getting a window into your psyche, understanding the way that you view the world and experience the world, and
yeah.
then use that internal viewpoint to externalize a message that you're most likely to respond to. And so the AI can create thousands of simulations in a second, see once it has an idea of you, target, bam, this one, and see which one has in its simulation the highest open rate, the highest reply rate. And then from the result of those simulations, send the winner. So it's like split testing in advance, which is freaking badass. And the AI writes the
First of
entire
all, dude,
email.
that is phenomenal. I didn't have AI to
Yeah,
do
right,
that when I
dude.
started
I
my
got a big ass
podcast.
advantage, man. I know. And I'm grateful
No, but
for it.
that's
I
smart.
see it.
That's
Yeah,
very
it's
smart.
huge.
How does it how well does it work?
It well got you on, so it works well enough.
I
Right? You
That's true.
know, it
That's so
works well,
true.
man. It also follows up too, which is dope. I got Mark Cuban to reply to one of the emails.
It's
I
dope.
didn't even know it was sent out to him. I just got a reply from him one day, and I was like, okay, all right. So he said no to the podcast to be straight up, but it got a reply because it personalizes the entire email, not just the name or company name or whatever. The whole email sequence is written for each person, and then follows up with them over time until they reply. It just doesn't stop until it gets either a no or a yes response. Doesn't matter.
But
Yeah.
you know that eventually he'll come on. He'll
Yeah, if
eventually
you, if
come
you
on.
keep it
So I've had
up.
people that I've brought on
Yeah.
say no, and then fast forward 3 years, they come on.
Yeah.
So it's all about, again, like for those people, like it's about allocate. So there's another piece to this that I didn't mention, which is important. So you asked how I got people on. So great subject line. The copy is really just so what I did for the copy and what I did for my targeting is focused on people that were launching something. So there's something in sales called intent. If you come from sales, you know what intent is. It means that there is a reason why they would want to purchase your product or service. Um, Again, let's translate that, and there's different ways to figure that out in a sales world. But okay, for podcasting, I want to get people that would like to come on my show because they have something happening in their life that they need to get PR for. So usually it's them launching a podcast or they're writing a book. That is intent for people. So Guy Kawasaki, why did he come on my podcast? He's one of the first big names. It was him and Grant Cardone, I think, in the first could have been first 10 episodes, first 15 episodes, which are big names for a first 10 or 15 episode podcast because I had no audience. I had no social when I started. The social that I started, I had actually deleted my Instagram and then I restarted social when I started the podcast. Anyways, so why did he say yes? For a variety of reasons. And in the copy, I was telling him what the podcast was. We were getting about 5,000 downloads a month at the time. It wasn't really significant. Um, I told him that I would make a whole bunch of clips from the show as well, which is just useful
Mm.
for him. So I said, you can repurpose these clips on your own social. So it's like free editing for you. And also, it's because he was launching his own podcast. So he wanted to get a little bit of buzz around his podcast. I will talk about the fact you're launching a podcast. Why are you launching a podcast when you speak 200 times a year? What was the pivot? And we'll talk about it. And then we'll, do a call to action to lead people back to your podcast. Anyways, so you have to find intent. And I've used a strategy to the point now I don't need to look for guests anymore. I get a lot of inbound. But when I was still looking for guests, which probably I've stopped for the past 2.5-ish years, but it was finding people that were releasing books. And I would go on Amazon, new releases or upcoming, I can't remember what the title's called. And then I would rank them by popularity and I'd do the category business. And I would find all the people that were thought leaders releasing business books. And that was it. And then I would just find their emails and run that same sequence to them. And I got a pretty good hit rate on that because they already knew they had to do PR. So this is part of and also I've reduced a lot of the energy required. I wasn't asking them to fly in anywhere. I was doing Zoom. So it was super easy for them. So for them, it was like one of probably 50 different podcasts they did, or maybe 30 or 20 or 30. But the point is they're doing a whole bunch of them. They did mine, and then I would use their name to get new people. So you build this system, and then this flywheel
Mm.
starts to make everything a lot easier. But that's how I got people on at the beginning. And then after a certain point, you don't have to find people anymore because all you get put on the lists, right? You get put on the list of if somebody is writing a book, Scott's on the list of, it's called Success Story, but Scott's show is on the list of we need to get on this podcast, which is nice, but then you start to have to filter and it's a good problem to have. So I'm never going to complain. But yeah, it's just getting that initial momentum to the point where it's not hard to get guests anymore. And the strategy I outlined is a really strong strategy. I don't know if everybody uses it. I don't think so, because every podcaster I've told this to is like, wow, that's so smart. But it works very, very well because you solve for intent.
Right.
And then after a while, you do 300 episodes, you don't have to solve for intent anymore because people come find you.
Interesting, right? Now you got the audience, you don't have to pay for traffic. You got something to launch, and bam, you've got the people to send it to. There's something to be
Yeah,
said about
exactly.
that from a generalized marketing point of view too, just aligning what you are selling, whether it be even just a podcast appearance or
Mhm.
an actual product itself, aligning it with their internal world, aligning it with where they're
Yes.
at in life right now. And first of all, knowing where they're at, knowing what they want to hear, what they're up to, and how you can contribute to that, as opposed to guessing or generalizing it to a product. It's a hell of a lot more effective if you write this. I saw that you wrote this book. I liked
Yeah.
this chapter, this page, this paragraph. Then the AI does all that, which is freaking cool too. But then you got
Well,
to be.
if you just generalize, like you could hit the right person. So in a business context, right? There's B2B, B2C. Um, Regardless, if I have, for example, a B2C product, a consumer good, and I'm marketing to people, but they have no intent to buy because maybe they weren't looking to switch their coffee brand. Okay, well then I can put an option in front of them, but if they're not looking to switch, then it's going to be harder to turn that person into somebody who really wants to try my product. But if somebody
Yeah.
just got, I don't know, if they just bought coffee at the grocery store from Nescafe and it was moldy, or I don't even know if coffee can get moldy, or the package was open, or something like that. It was just gross that you got turned off. Obviously, it's not easy, but if you can find a way to figure out that that person just had that experience, it's a little
Mhm.
bit easier in enterprise B2B because you see the decision makers actually come to your website. But you can also do this with B2C products because there's intelligence that allows you to see who's looking on your website, where they're coming from, what other brands they're looking at as well. So you can start to see behaviors that signal intent
Yeah.
because somebody is looking for an alternative product or service, and you could be an option for that. And there's also, by the way, a lot of data services that you can pay for that are significantly expensive, but if you run a big company, you can pay for intent or
Mhm.
intent signals.
Mhm.
And for me, I come from a B2B world primarily. I've dabbled in B2C, but primarily B2B. So I would get these signals that people from this particular company were looking at our product or service, and then I could find out what tech stack they were already using. So if somebody's using an existing tech stack that's a competitor to yours, and you can find a way to figure out if they are researching your product or service, then you start to understand that there's some sort of reason as to why they're looking to maybe switch from what they already have to what you could provide them. And then when you find those people, what that does is it shortens your buying cycle, right? Because if you just reach out to somebody that has no intention to switch products or services in business or in consumer goods, uh, they'll learn about you, but they may not choose to buy from you for another 6 months or 12 months or 2 years. But if they got burnt by somebody and they had a really bad experience and they're looking for a new product, they could switch in the next 2 to 3 months, which is really what you want to do because it's the same amount of energy. It's going to be less energy for the same amount of money, excuse me, to convert somebody that is actively looking for your product or service. So if most large organizations understand this, but if you are selling an enterprise product and you're not closing your deals fast enough. Maybe it's because you're just hitting people that are happy with what they already have, and you're spending so much energy trying to nurture them and convert them, when really you should be finding people that are unhappy with what they have and find a way to convert those people because you realize your sales cycle is going to be much shorter.
How do you find those buyers with intent though? One of the ways that I think about what you're talking about is because it can be tricky, right? The way that I
Mhm.
think about it is from the Jay Abraham lens. If somebody's buying something, let's say you sell a Facebook ad course or a agency, it
Yeah.
doesn't matter. Somebody who's interested in advertising on Facebook, which is your ideal customer, is also investing in website or funnel software. So you can JV with a funnel software and say, hey, look, you got the funnel here, to the list owner. If you provided this service, you wouldn't leave your clients out to hang to try to find something on their own. It's
Yeah.
reputable, and you get a profit you get an extra profit source from it too. That's one way to find intent, because you can infer that if they're interested in A, they're also going to be interested in B, and you can put together those deals. And then back to the podcasting, I mean, hell, that's one way to get into the door. But other than that, I mean, it's tricky to find the
Well,
intent to be
yeah.
able to make those connections, especially if they're
Well,
invisible leads.
I have a couple ideas. So, a very basic way to do it is if you have like a downloadable educational asset, like a white paper on your website. If somebody that is a signal of intent. That is not saying that, maybe you're selling cybersecurity services, and there's a white paper on uh, on the top cybersecurity service providers and adjacent products or services in your industry in 2024, and you do a study. I don't know, I'm just making this up on the fly, but that's one signal. So if somebody is actively looking for those kinds of resources, find a resource that is a signal that, okay, they're not a customer of ours, they're a customer of someone else, but they're looking for something that gives you a list of the best alternatives. Then there's a good chance they're maybe not 100% happy with what they already have. So you have to find the best possible thing that works in the context of your industry, but that could be one signal. I mean, there's more obvious signals. So HubSpot, um, I think the product is called retention.com, but they've changed their name a few times. These actually track activity on your website. So they can track IP addresses and domains that hit your website. And you can see if somebody from abcdomain.com hits your website, that means they're researching your product or service. So what I would do with that information is I would then go find my decision maker who would be, I already know who my ideal customer profile is. So say I'm a cybersecurity company and my ideal customer profile is, I don't know, finance organizations between 100 to 500 employees doing this much revenue in the USA. And somebody from pick a finance company, looks at my website. So they fit my ideal customer profile. And I can see through the tools and that I've built into my website that somebody from financecompany.com hit my website. Okay, great. That's intent. Now I have to go find what's called the buyer persona. Who's the actual individual? Because I've already figured this out as well. I know that if I'm selling cybersecurity to a finance company, I'm looking for CTO. That is the person who I've sold to for the past 5 years. That's a really smart play. I'm going to go find the CTO for this finance company. I could be as bold as to say, I noticed that somebody from your organization was actually looking at our products or services. It'd be great to chat. Or I could just remove that because maybe that feels a little bit too, Orwellian, figuring out, who's seeing the fact that I'm seeing their employee on my website. Maybe I wouldn't even say that, but I would say, this is what we offer. These are the pain points that we solve for. It'd be great to have a conversation. But the point is, I know the decision maker, the buyer persona, and the company that fits my ICP that was on my website. Now everything's starting to align. So that would be a great way. And I just mentioned two tools that allow you to do that. So that would be where I would start at least. But then those are relatively inexpensive tools. You can, if I'm not mistaken, Zoom Info is a more expensive tool that will give you intent data. And there's a plethora of enterprise business intelligence tools. If you're making enough money, it would be worth it. If your deals are 50,000, 100,000, a million, 5 million, whatever the size, your deal size is, if you're playing in that space, then there are some very smart business intelligence intent tools that you can pay for that can tell you exactly who's looking for your product or service. And they can even go as far as to say they didn't even hit your website, but I know somebody from this finance company was investigating your competitor's website, so you should go reach out to them because they're searching for your product or service or solution
Mm,
that you provide.
mm.
So there's a lot, but at the very least, you can track people that do come to your website, and you can see if they go to your website through a work domain where they're coming from. And if you see them come to your website a few times, well, then it just further signals more intent.
Interesting. I mean, hell, if somebody from a certain company came on my site and I would send it the actual screenshot of their employee going to the site, like screw the Orwellian crap. I don't give a shit. It's cool as hell to be able to say, look at here's a screenshot of your employee. Bam, somebody's interested. It shows
You
that
could,
you're
dude.
you're
Yeah,
ambitious enough to give a shit enough to want to reach out not only about that visit but to the right individual too. And the
yeah,
picture brings proof to that situation. You know, one of the things
yeah.
you bring up is using the right bait. To get them to
Mhm.
raise their hand. You know, Dean Jackson talks about an invisible lead and a visible lead. So invisible lead is, you know, somebody like a chiropractor. You can search Google and find the ideal leads and, LinkedIn search, whatever. They're easy to find. But the invisible leads, you got to have, like you're saying, some kind of intent. So like what you're talking about is giving them some sort of reason to opt in. You know, what would
Yeah.
my ideal target audience individual be interested in? Advertise that, and once they do raise their hand, now you know that they've got intent and you can market based around what they opted into. The question then becomes, how do you get people on the site, man? I mean, hell, because right, because you got to get the right people. What's your traffic strategy for right?
Well, I mean, now we're doing the gamut of marketing activities, right? So how to get people on the site. So you have demand generation. So we were speaking about outbound sales before, how you identify your ICP and your buyer persona, and then you run outbound email cadences to them. On the flip side, that's outbound. And then on the flip side of that, what completes the puzzle for the whole sales and marketing strategy is demand generation or inbound. So how do we attract customers to us, right? And then that becomes performance marketing. So ads on Facebook and Google, or I mean, you can find cheaper marketplaces. You could advertise on Bing if that works for you and you're getting a positive ROAS or return on ad spend. But you still have to start to explore performance marketing. If you don't have money, then usually day one is a good content strategy plus a good SEO strategy. So SEO strategy is blogging about topics that your potential customer would care about, pain points, and answering questions about pain points that your customer has. And then obviously optimizing those and figuring out the keywords and figuring out what the subject line is for the blog and what and then you can start talking about not just on-page SEO, but then you can talk about backlinking and getting high DA links from high authority sources and all the SEO things. That's one way. And I think all companies should invest in SEO, or at least start to blog on their website with the right keywords, because SEO is a very long strategy, but also it can be a content strategy. So posting on social is huge, but good content on social. And that's why I think podcasting is a great resource for B2B or B2C, because you can have these conversations and then I can use that as a scalable content strategy for all of my social. So if as a business, I'm struggling to think about what do I put on all of my social media, and I don't really have a strong content strategy, and I don't want to be like all the other businesses that just put out the most boring content, then I could have conversations with thought leaders in my space. So say again, that cybersecurity example I just brought up. Um, I could have conversations with other CTOs from other types of companies like finance companies or maybe healthcare companies or whoever I sell to. I could have conversations with them about the current state of cybersecurity. And then I could chop those conversations up into tons of social content, into quotes, and I can turn that podcast into a newsletter. Also, I could be having a conversation with the decision maker that I could build a relationship with while we're having that hour-long Zoom call. And not only is that giving me content for social, but it also could turn into an actual relationship that could turn into a sale. So you asked, how do I generate traffic? It's content, it's performance marketing, it's SEO. What else? I mean, those are the main levers you got to pull. And it's going to change depending on what you're selling. Obviously, if you're selling a consumer good like a melatonin gummy, you're going to probably want to figure out how to generate some great, fun UGC, user generated content, or maybe lean heavily on influencers where maybe influencers aren't as relevant in the B2B space, or maybe they are. But you got to map out all the different marketing activities that you can do, figure out internally in your company, what are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What can you do yourself? What can you outsource? What are you good at? What are you not good at? And what resonates with the audience and the potential customers that you want to attract, and then find a system that allows you to do that repeatedly.
Hmm.
And that's pretty much it. It's like, it seems like a lot, but it's not a lot. There's only so many sales activities and marketing activities you can really test out. And ultimately, you see which ones are working, because the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule, will always apply. There will always be one marketing channel that outperforms all the others and drives the most revenue, drives the most traffic. And that's the one, not, you don't ignore the rest, but that's the one you continuously optimize and iterate. So if you find that you can really nail user generated content because you have somebody who works in your company that is the funniest TikTok person ever, and everything they do goes viral because they have a finger on the pulse of culture, then that's what you invest in, because that's what's going to drive the most traffic. And hopefully that's what's going to convert. Now, if you're just driving traffic and not converting, that's another conversation. But the point is, you invest in what's working, because there's only so many different marketing activities a business can do. So that's that's how you drive traffic.
Right on, man. Yeah, it depends based on what business you're talking about, what target audience you have.
Yeah.
If you're selling to old folks, maybe TikTok wouldn't be the best platform. Maybe it would. I don't know.
No, that's where
But
you have to
again,
know. Well, you have
you
to
know,
know your audience and you got to test
right?
shit. I think that's the biggest thing. I think the biggest issue that businesses have is a lot of businesses understand SEO. A lot of businesses understand performance marketing like Facebook ads, Google ads, whatever, but they don't test new shit. I think that's the biggest missed opportunity. So you look at Duolingo. So Duolingo has won marketing awards because of their stupid green dancing owl, which is their mascot. Duolingo is like a language learning app, right? It teaches you how to learn French and Spanish and Portuguese and every language under the sun. So that's it. That's what the product is. But they have won marketing awards, and I'm sure they have like hundreds of millions of views on TikTok, on all the short form platforms. They become a cult like they've built a cult like following because they have somebody who works in their marketing department that puts on a big green owl mascot, physical, think about like a football mascot that would run out on stage on the field. And that person does these most ridiculous, unhinged trends on social, and they go viral again and again and again and again. And that is, I'm sure, one of their main buckets for marketing. Now, a company that size, I'm sure, does a lot of other stuff too, but they figured out that this is what brings them the most awareness in the market, and they triple down on it.
Hmm.
So that is an app, a language learning app that learned how to tap into culture by testing out new platforms, short form video on TikTok. So yeah, maybe if you are selling, you know what? I know somebody who owns a wheelchair ramp company, so it helps businesses become ADA compliant. And right now they're trying to figure out. I mean, that would be your example. They do sell to older people predominantly, not exclusively, but the majority of people that have disability issues probably I could see as they get older, it's probably a little bit more, it happens a little bit more often. So they are trying to figure out a way to revolutionize and modernize their market. And they're telling stories on TikTok about other people that had basically issues with businesses and how having a non ADA compliant business like significantly ruined and or impacted this person's life. So it's less fun, but it's very real, and it's really highlighting the problem that the brand is solving. So I would think that they're going to kill it because how many other people that make wheelchair ramps are trying to win on TikTok? Not many, very few, right? So I think that there's a huge opportunity for people that make the assumption that their industry is too boring or too legacy or too old school to go on these new platforms. And again, some people could look at me and say, Scott, you're crazy. If I do garbage pickup, I don't want to worry about having a great TikTok account. But I would say you should at least try it because I'm pretty sure there's some companies that are going to uh, not only just try to figure out TikTok, but become a younger generation's go-to brand for that particular product or service. And also, I think resonate with a younger generation in a really positive way, which I think is the thing that people miss. So you don't just want to build your brand to just convert. You want to build your brand so that if you are in a legacy industry, um, you have an attachment and a younger generation has an attachment to you because you feel relevant. So I think that can only help your brand in the future. And I think that because these legacy industries don't even try, I think the bar is so low.
Well, yeah, no shit, right? And you can think about content for any business. It goes back to actually what Gary Vee talked about, bringing it back to him, which is even just showing the process of what you do. For the garbage pickup,
Yeah.
for example, you could do a slow-mo video, super slow-mo, frame by frame of crushing garbage or something. People love that shit. They eat it up. But
Yeah.
somebody who didn't think about that wouldn't be taking advantage of that traffic source. And it's easy to think that, oh, that doesn't apply to my business. But I think what Gary Vee talks about is showing the process and creating multiple
Showing the
pieces of
process.
content on different platforms that
And
can
also
build
like
an audience of itself. It's free traffic. The
it's free
objection to
traffic.
it, well, the
Yeah.
objection to it is well, if I only have a few views on it, then it kind of takes away the authority and the prestige of my brand. So the question becomes, how do you grow it? Because you built a hell of a following. How did you get from nothing to something? What are the steps, especially these days? What would you
Yeah.
recommend doing? What have you learned?
So
Hey, I hope you're enjoying the podcast, and I want to let you know that I've got a free book that you can get if you want to tap into more of these resources. And you can get that for free at kylesbook.com. Back to the podcast.
so the main thing is to have a system that allows you to repeatedly test what works and what doesn't. I think that's the most important thing.
Mm,
I don't think that if a brand put out content and it didn't hit immediately, anyone would even care because nobody's really seeing it if it doesn't hit, right? I've never heard somebody say, I'm going to stop using this brand because they haven't figured out how to go viral on TikTok. So at the bare minimum, because nobody's even seen your TikTok, nobody even knows it exists. So I don't kill it on TikTok, but it doesn't hurt my brand. I'm still testing on TikTok. I kill it on LinkedIn. I have a great podcast, have a great newsletter. For some reason, Facebook has done very well recently too, which I think is because it's tapping into a larger international audience. If I look at the stats and the demographics, and then Instagram as well. But TikTok for me, it's not killing it, but it's there. But nobody's not listening to my podcast just because I don't get a million views on my last TikTok. But what I will be able to do is over time, I am building an audience and it's creeping up and I see it incrementally growing as opposed to exponentially growing. But again, we're in this for the long game, so I'm not that concerned. I see it moving in the right direction. I don't think I'm a consumer. I don't give a shit if a brand isn't killing it because the person they hired for marketing on TikTok didn't quite figure out which dance or which trend or which challenge resonated with the market. I'm actually excited that they're trying it. I'm like, wow, their CMO, whoever is running their marketing, is forward thinking enough to test. That's my opinion. That's totally my opinion. But I don't think that would hurt a brand at all if they're trying. And again, what hurts a brand for me is what 99% of businesses do right now, which is shit, boring content, static images, like boring stuff that doesn't even look like they used Canva to make. Uh, like the posts you see on LinkedIn congratulating President's Clubs winners for pick a company, like none of that stuff matters to me. It's all very boring. It's all very dry. Or like a post on LinkedIn, I see this a lot. It's like the state of the industry. Okay, that's interesting, but if that's your only LinkedIn post for the past 6 months, like I don't care about that. Maybe I'll read it if I was in the industry, but you want to market to more than people want to be entertained on social. So I would rather align with a brand that does a state of the industry report and post that on LinkedIn, but also has a lot of fun content that speaks to me, that engages me, that teaches me in different formats as well. So I like learning in different formats. I would love a brand that has a podcast and a great YouTube channel, for example, or a great newsletter I can read that isn't written like a corporate newsletter. So for me, that's the brand I gravitate towards. And even if they aren't killing it day one, they're still trying and testing. And I respect that as a marketer. And on top of that, if the information they put into that is good, okay, maybe it isn't edited perfectly, but is the information and the product and the quality of the insight useful? And are they attempting to bring it across multiple mediums? It shows me that they are a forward-thinking brand and they're going to figure it out eventually because everyone figures it out eventually. That is my thesis. Everyone does figure it out eventually if you test and you iterate for a long enough period of time. So as a consumer, I would respect that more than a brand not even trying.
Yeah, I'm the same way, dude. It's just it depends on the target audience because somebody who's an entrepreneur like us, we're respecting that it doesn't matter the view count, whatever. They're hustling and
Yeah.
they're providing value and entertainment perhaps ideally, and then they're like, okay, so I can jam with this brand because you
Yeah.
connect with them, and they provided value. I would assume so, and you're building a connection with them at the end of the day as opposed
I
to
think so.
like the Louis Vuittons and like you see their marketing, it's these kinds of brands. I don't connect with it, it's like it's very
It's too clinical. A lot of it,
clinical is
and
the right way
even
to
Louis
put that.
Vuitton,
Yeah,
it's
is
very
right.
clinical. And even I would say even Louis Vuitton and luxury goods, I would even say they're a step ahead of most because they still realize that they have to
Yeah.
attract a consumer. I'm talking about airlines. I'm talking about
Mm.
finance. medical, like just so boring, so boring. And I get that there's compliance and regulatory and you can't say the wrong thing. However, you see people that, who's the guy, the legal, another one, super boring. Who's the guy? Oh my goodness, I'm gonna blank on his last name now, which is so bad. He's the attorney that killed it on TikTok. He's like a personal injury attorney. He killed it on TikTok. Mike, oh, I'm gonna blank on his last name now, but he has millions and millions and millions of followers on TikTok, and everything he's done is above board. He hasn't had his license revoked. He's probably one of the most recognizable lawyers and attorneys you've ever met. And there's no reason why any other attorney lawyer can't do what he's doing. And he's just educational. And it's high production value. And I'm learning stuff when I watch his channel. I love that. If I had an issue, who do you think now he probably has his own firm and he has lawyers that work for him? But if, and by the way, the first video he put out was not great, but now he's done it for 5 or 6, or I don't even know how many years he's been doing it for. But now they're phenomenal because it's a whole media business he's been able to build uh, out of all this content. And if I had to hire someone and
Yeah.
he was local to me, who am I picking? Like, it's not even a question. I'm picking the guy that I've seen 20 times on TikTok, not the guy that I've never spoken to before in my life or never even heard of. So all of a sudden, you're building this presence before people even need you, which will ultimately
Mhm.
turn them into customers. And I think that's also what people get wrong about social and going viral and putting energy into content. It's sometimes not about turning somebody into a customer immediately. It's turning them to a customer in 5 years. There's
Mm.
there's a quote from, it could have either been BMW or Mercedes, but basically the quote doesn't really matter. The point is luxury car brand CEO goes on record saying, like, why do you think we advertise on television, right? Like, why do you think we don't want to turn somebody into, we don't expect to turn somebody into a customer in the next, 24 to 48 hours to even 30 days after they see your commercial? We advertise on television so that when you see these ads from when you're a kid to when you're 35, 40, we're the brand of car that you trust. And this is how, by the way, this is not just, this is a CEO going on record saying this, but I'm pretty sure all car brands operate the same way. So they expect you, and especially luxury, because luxury is a little bit different. If you see lower end car brands, they'll speak about financing offers that are available right now. But luxury car brands never do that because they want to imprint in your mind that this is the luxury brand, that when you have the money, this will be what you spend your money on. They'll never talk about financing ever because they don't want
Yeah.
that kind of customer. They want
Mm.
somebody who will build the affinity with the brand, who will eventually turn into a lifelong fan of Mercedes or BMW or Porsche or whatever. So I think that there is a long tail to social as well that people ignore because they need it to operate like a Facebook ad, which is difficult because that's not always, sometimes it's the case, but that's not always the case. Do you want one more one more example? When you advertise for the Super Bowl or when you pay Kim Kardashian for a post, you are paying to tap into culture. You're not, of course, it would be nice to have an immediate ROI, but more often than not, especially with the prices that Kim Kardashian charges for a post on Instagram, you are associating with somebody who is culturally relevant.
Mhm.
So social media is all about becoming culturally relevant, whether or not you put out your own content or if you're paying an influencer like that. And I think that brands, first of all, don't understand that, but then they also don't know how to use that for the long tail strategy. I think they're too focused on the immediate. And that's fair because immediate pays the bills. But when you use someone like Kim Kardashian, you have to think about, how am I going to use this so that I'm going to be culturally relevant? So I'm the brand that people think about for the next 3 to 5 to 10 years. And I think that's how you have to think about social to an extent. And that's what you should optimize for. Because if you become culturally relevant and your brand becomes, the brand name becomes synonymous with the category because you've tapped into culture,
Mm.
that's
Yeah.
where you win.
The brand name
It's not
becomes
easy.
synonymous with the category, right? It's like Rolex with
Yeah.
watch. It's like you think of
Yeah.
watch, you think of the certain brands that stick out. That's an interesting way of putting it. You know, the way I think about it is programming an unconscious or the subconscious of somebody to when they think of A, that they automatically there's an association to B. It's like
Yeah.
Pavlov's dogs, you know. You ring the bell, you ring the tuning fork, and bam, they salivate. You talk about watches, boom, Rolex comes up. You know, it's
Rolex. Yeah.
the you see what I mean? So
Yeah,
um,
I know exactly what you mean. So how do you accomplish that? Well,
yeah.
I think that's where you have to tap into culture, and that's where social has a huge opportunity that most brands don't get.
Tap into culture. It's an interesting way of putting that for sure. And culture is always changing too.
It
And like
is,
for
but that's what.
example,
But like
yeah.
Nike,
Oh yeah.
they're tapped into culture. Rolex is a great example. But then also things like, let's Google that, right? The name of the company has become ingrained in culture. These are not
Mhm.
easy things to do, but I'm just saying there are how many how many industries do not have somebody whose name is tied into the category or the industry? There's an opportunity there. But right now, if I think of language learning apps, all I can think about is Duolingo. All I can think about is Duolingo because I've seen that stupid green owl so many times on my phone
Mm.
doing the most ridiculous shit. So it doesn't matter if somebody has a better language learning app. All I think about is Duolingo. And now I talk about it on podcasts. I talk about it with my friends, talk about it with other marketers because I keep telling them this is an example of genius marketing. Another example, Wendy's on Twitter. Wendy's is savage on Twitter. It is the most ruthless, demeaning, like they're hilarious. It's Wendy's, their burgers and fries. What are they doing killing it on Twitter? And if people don't believe me, go look at Wendy's Twitter. They're so they're so mean, but they're so good. So now you remember that brand. How many other fast food burger brands do I remember because of Twitter? None. Now, obviously, McDonald's is a difficult thing to displace. So I still think that that is a very crowded category, but they're trying and they're not doing too bad. Um, but again, there's a lot of industries where there is no McDonald's, where you don't
Right.
have that behemoth, and you can just take the crown. You can capture the hill if you put a little bit of energy in, and that's what Duolingo did with language learning apps.
Right, and that goes full circle with the content generation, you know, and the
Yeah,
relationships you build through podcasts, man. You know,
yeah,
I keep going back to it because it's a fascinating way to build that contact with their target audience as well. Like you said, nobody's
mhm,
searching for at the beginning, you Scott Clary's solution for
yeah,
ABC, whatever, but they're searching for Guy Kiyosaki's, and then your name
yeah,
comes up, bam, and then there's an unconscious association that takes place with like if
yeah,
Kim Kardashian posts, for example, there's Kim Kardashian and you there's a sort of alignment now, right? Even me just
yeah,
saying that it kind of connected the dots. It doesn't even have to, it's arbitrary, but the
yeah.
two together with a logical bridge between the two forms that connection the same way. And you can do it both ways too. Like Kanye's Super Bowl ad, I fucking love it, man. It was so badass. He literally, it was like a selfie video from his phone telling people to go to his website. And he tripled his investment, quadrupled his investment on the Super Bowl ad just on immediate sales of his site.
So he killed it.
That was freaking
I would say
badass,
he's
man. That's
probably one of the only people that had a positive return for a Super Bowl ad. Like that was
immediately
phenomenal. But
so.
that's yeah, but that's where you start to understand that social isn't always about perfect and refined
Yeah.
and and clinical. Again, using that word, that was a zero budget Super Bowl ad, but that's why it stood out. And I think that's also what companies miss. Gary talks about this a lot. A lot of this stuff he's reiterated, and it's something that I don't just want to parrot, but it's something that I've seen in my own life, in my own career, and it's worked for me. But you don't have to be clinical about your content. You can just put stuff out and test. And if it doesn't work, then nobody sees it. We radically overestimate how much people actually care about us in our content. Like nobody gives a shit.
Yeah. True.
I've reposted pieces that have I've posted it 6 months ago. I posted it again, I think last week. Nobody remembers, or maybe somebody does, but they also don't give a shit if they do remember. It's like we need to get out of our own heads. This is more of a life lesson than a content lesson, but it definitely applies to content because it's us putting ourselves on a stage. But we need to get out of our own heads and just ship more and test. And it's something that I struggled with. I'm sure with a multi-layer bureaucratic corporate infrastructure they struggle with. But when you let someone ship, yeah, don't be racist, don't be an asshole, don't do those things. But outside of that, like test trends, test challenges, test test things that will just give you feedback from the market as to what resonates and what doesn't.
Right. The
That's
feedback, it's a scientific
yeah,
method. You have a hypothesis, you put it out there, see what happens, and
yeah,
adjust your method based on the feedback that you get. And there's something to be said about the
100%.
opposite viewpoint of it too. Like Kanye's versus everybody else's high budget Super Bowl ad is that the huge contrast between the two. It's a pattern interrupt, and you're like, damn, there's something different here happening. It's the
Yeah,
opposite, right? Kind of like Wendy's with Twitter, for example. They're assholes, right? But then they're also at the same time getting attention. They're getting retweets. They're getting is it even a
yeah.
retweet anymore? A re-X? Who the fuck knows?
Reacts,
It's
I don't know, dude.
I don't know, man. But they're getting attention because they're taking advantage of that polarity. There's an
Yeah,
expectation of A, and they do the complete opposite of that, and it captures people's attention like no other. So
yeah,
I think there's
correct.
something to be said about looking at what everybody else is doing and thinking seriously about what the opposite would look like and test that
Yeah.
out and see what happens. And there'll be multiple. You can test out different variations of the opposite, but
I
all
put
it
out
takes is
tons of
one.
content, dude.
What's
Oh no,
up?
go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, I mean, all it takes is one piece of content that blows up, and then it changes everything, right? Is that what you
Yeah.
experienced? Was there one thing that you did that it took off, or was it very gradual?
No, it was very gradual. It was very
Interesting.
gradual. I would say that the levers that I use that move the needle the most would be tapping into other people's audiences. That's
Mm,
huge. So obviously, if on Instagram that looks like a collaboration, that really helps because you're tapping into 1 million people, 100,000 people, 500,000 people that had no idea who you were. For growth on other channels, for a newsletter or a podcast, the biggest growth levers, again, it was tapping into other people's audiences. And that could be paid or free. So let me explain what I mean by that. On the podcast, I have done show swaps with other podcasts. I've also paid to advertise my show on other podcasts. And I think that's probably what moves the needle the most. On the newsletter, I also have done like ad swaps with other newsletters and also paid to put my newsletter and pay for an ad in another newsletter. But I only ever advertise my podcast on other podcasts. I only ever advertise my newsletter on other newsletters. And the reason being is
mm,
because I do not want to have to convince somebody
right.
to like podcasts and then to like
Yes.
mine. I just want somebody who already likes podcasts to look at mine as another option. That's the
Mm.
goal. It's just reducing the friction and conversion. And
Entering the
I've done
world
that
that they're already
successfully.
in, exactly, it's one less
Yeah.
sale to make because you already have to make the sale to watch your podcast. You don't wanna have to make the
Yeah.
sale to watch any podcast and then choose my podcast over top of it.
Exactly.
It's a huge hurdle, and I think that there's something to be said about that. Entering the world that they're already in, and
Yeah.
instead of trying to find people who aren't interested, find people who are interested and shift their interest to you, in some way, whether
Of
it be
course,
through
it's just
collaboration or
logical. It makes so much
association.
more sense. But why does nobody do that? Why are people
Yeah,
running Facebook ads for their podcast?
interesting.
I mean, they like it doesn't make sense to me. And
Mm.
also, if you want to be scrappy, if you want to apply an entrepreneur mindset, okay, so this podcast has 5,000 downloads per month, mine has 5,000 downloads per month. It's soft cost to us to switch, and we both tap into a new audience. Why would you not do that?
And create
So,
content in the process, there's
and
leverage as
create
well.
content in the
Yeah.
process. You just have to be
And
smart about it.
well, yeah, right. So there's a strategy to it. The high level thinking is yes, there's the traffic you're getting, the leads you're getting access to, but then also the relationships that you can do multiple things with over time.
Hmm.
And that's, I think, the biggest asset of what we're talking about here. So
1,000%.
let's wrap it up with this, brother. I want to know because there's value that I could get out of you, but I don't know the questions to ask. So if I were to ask any question, you know what I'm saying? So if I were to ask
Yeah.
any question that would withdraw the most amount of value from you, your expertise, your experience, what would that question be? And then hook it up with the answer.
Okay. So we've spoken a lot about tactics today, which is very useful. Tactics are part of the game, and I've touched on this at the beginning, but the ability to stick with it for a long enough period of time is the other X factor in success. It's very obvious to me. What I hate about the current state of content and thought leadership on the internet is people fall into one of two camps. They fall into the I'm going to teach you very tactical steps on how to do this. I'll teach you how to run a Facebook ad set, or how to put together a pitch deck to go raise money from VCs, or how to edit a podcast on YouTube so that there's a hook and people tune in, they don't drop off in the first 30 seconds. Okay, tactics are great. Those are all going to help. And then the other side of social media world is mindset. It's it's all of the, and I won't name names because I know some of them, but it's focusing too much on belief systems and not enough on tactics. It's focusing too much on mindset of abundance and mindset of this and not enough on. So the issue that I have is that both of these things are required. Tactics, more obvious. Mindset, less obvious to a logical person like me, but for true success, why is mindset so important? It's because mindset is the ability to stay in the game long enough to apply the tactics to learn
Mm,
what works and what doesn't.
mm,
And if you just think you're going to go build something with motivation, I can't stand the word motivation. Why do I hate motivation? Because motivation stops the second something gets hard. And it's going to get hard a lot and you're going to fail a lot. And that's normal. And the way to fail less is to fail and to learn and to improve. So my issue is that people fall into one of two camps when realistically, to build anything meaningful, you have to have the tactics, you have to have the systems and the processes to stick with it long enough. And you have to have the mindset mentally to persevere past year 3, past year 4, when you're not making money. And that's really effing hard. That's really, really hard. So, and all the systems and the processes and the maybe not quitting your job so that you aren't worried about rent next month, all of that helps with the right mindset to be able to do it for long enough. Because if you figured it out for the first week, you should be able to figure it out for the next 10 years. And I believe that if anybody wants to be successful, they should commit 10 years of their life to trying to build that thing. And that's when you start to see success. But most people don't commit 10 years to anything. And if you even look at from a podcast example, how many millions of podcasts are there? And I don't remember the stats, but it's something like 99% haven't done more than 5 episodes, something
yeah.
ridiculous like that.
Yeah.
So, and I see it. I see people that are on the same journey as me, building the same shit as me. And then I lose track of them, and then I'll go to their Instagram and I'll see they took 2 years off and they're restarting it again, or they
Mm,
gave up and they started a new business, or they went and got a job. I'm telling you, like mindset is very important. Like all the Angela Duckworth, the grit that is required, the stick to itness, all of that is very, very important even for your own show. You have to find a way to do it for 10 years. It's not going to be easy, but if you can figure out a way to do it for 10 years, meaning you're not burning out, you're building systems, you're supporting yourself financially, and you enjoy it, you find value in it,
mm,
intrinsic value in it outside of the money component, then you'll be able to stick with it. The issue with a lot of businesses, they're not as fun as podcasts. If I'm selling a widget, maybe I care a little bit about the industry, but ultimately 5 years and pulling in $200,000 a month, it's difficult. But there will be a bell curve moment if you're smart and you apply your learnings from all the failures and things that didn't work. So I think that's the lesson that I want to leave people with. They have to find a way to stick with it for almost an unreasonable amount of time for it to be
mm,
successful. The way that I also do this for myself is, it seems silly, but I think it's important. I think that the reason why people burn out is because they focus on the negatives and the losses and the failures too often, and they do not focus enough on the wins they've had. So I think that a
ah,
useful tactic amongst many others is to actually pay attention to the wins that you have, truly pay attention to them, because we will always remember when we lost a deal, lost money, we were fired, we had to fire somebody, we were sued, we were dumped, divorced. We remember all this shit, but then we forget that we won 2,000 times that day already. This is a win for me. I have a call after this, which is an ad deal with a new advertiser. That's a win. Like there's so many wins. We forget them because psychologically our brain is programmed to remember the most traumatizing experiences, not the good times, right? And that's from an evolutionary sort of safety
yeah.
perspective. But yeah, I think if we codify our wins, we keep track of them, it gives us the mental firepower to stick with it long enough, because we can almost logic ourselves into understanding that if we've won X amount of times before, we are not hurting financially. We're fulfilling Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We're not stressed out. And things are moving in the right direction because we've figured out the KPIs, and they may be moving incrementally, but they're still moving. Then it's just a matter of time before we become successful. And I think that's the lesson.
Yeah, it's not a matter of if, but when, and I think
It's
that goes
always a
to the
matter of when.
identity that you go into it. Because if you look at yourself and truly believe that you are the person that's going to do this for 10 years, 15, 20 years or
Yeah,
more, you would, and you believe that's who you are. If you don't do that, it creates an identity shattering experience. There's a
yeah,
cognitive dissonance between who you
yeah.
view yourself as and what you're actually doing in the world, and that can become incredibly uncomfortable. So the discomfort of not doing it becomes greater than the comfort of doing it, right? So you know what I
I
mean?
love that.
And you
I
create the
love that.
identity of the person who does this, and anything else creates this uncomfortable feeling of kind of something feels wrong here because it's not who I am. And you align your
Yeah,
identity with your actions, and you can make those adjustments long term based on market feedback.
it's so interesting because you actually have, so that's so, I have thoughts on this too. I'm curious about your thoughts on this. I have thoughts on this. So it is important for what you're building to become your identity. Like, how do you introduce yourself? I had a hard time, saying I run a podcast. Like that to me was very difficult for that to become my identity. So I think that it's important to understand how you introduce yourself, right? What's the first thing that comes to mind? What are you comfortable introducing yourself as? That is truly your identity. Whether or not you like it, your subconscious will tell all. But it's important to know, it's important for it to become your identity because it will allow you to do it for a long period of time, which is required for success. It's also very important to understand that failure is part of the process, but failure is not a hit on your identity because
Mm,
that can totally derail people when
yeah.
their whole value and worth is tied up in this thing and it doesn't work. That can debilitate and derail people not just in the moment for years
Mm,
because their whole identity was wrapped up into this thing. So I think it's important. You just have to be careful about how you let negative feedback and negative circumstances impact you because when you make it your identity, it messes with you when shit doesn't go right. And this
mm,
is at any level. And this could not just be an entrepreneur. This could be all those people that worked for a company for 30 years. You could be damn sure that was their identity before COVID and they were laid off or furloughed. Those people, like mental health issues, I'm sure trauma, I'm sure some suicide, like horrible things, because something becomes your identity and you don't realize that minor setbacks are part of life. And I truly believe that they are minor setbacks. Like if you're still alive and if you're still functioning, you're still operating, you're still able to build tomorrow, it's a minor setback, right? What's the saying? Like don't spend so much time thinking about something that won't impact you in 10 years or whatever that saying
right.
is.
Yeah.
Shit happens. Like you're still alive, you're still breathing, you can still figure it out. Again, it's 10 years of your life to figure this out. So you losing a
Mm,
contract or whatever is not going to be the end of your business. You getting sued is not going to be the end of your business. I mean, once you get to a certain level, all this shit happens. I was talking to a guy yesterday on my show, and we were laughing about how he gets sued so much that it's almost become like run of the mill. Like he has in-house counsels. It's just like he's operating at a level. He runs a publicly traded company, so billions at this point, and it's just like par for the course. But every single time he gets sued for whatever reason, even the most erroneous reasons, uh, each one of those would destroy an early stage entrepreneur
yeah.
because they would be so stressed about what's going on in their life. When now it's like this is happening all the time for him. So I think that it's very important to realize like the sun always comes up in the morning too, which is why I think that it's important to remove all those additional stresses. That's why I don't
Mm.
believe in quitting your job to start something immediately. I think you have to find a way to support yourself financially so that, for example, when you are building something and something doesn't work out, you don't have all these additional added pressures that really serve no, like they're all completely avoidable.
Well, it takes
That's
away from the
that's yeah.
effectiveness too, because if you're
Yes.
attached to the result of it, then you're
Yeah.
forcing it to happen, and then you make mistakes, you fuck up, and then that doesn't happen. That's what
Yeah.
I find with myself, for example. If I need something to happen, I get all nervous, I get flustered, I go into it, and I fuck it up because I needed it to happen. There's too much
Yeah.
pressure. So if you detach from the result like that and you focus on the 10-year viewpoint, you don't give a shit
Yeah.
about one contract because there's going to be 1,000 of them. And so that
Exactly.
that
And
very
and you
detachment
trust
increases your performance.
And I think that it's easier to separate yourself from detachment when you prepare. So for me, like I don't leave things to chance. I'll put as much prep as I possibly can into something. So for like, by the way, the concept of preparation is so underrated and it's so not a significant amount of energy and effort, but people just F off and they don't do it. So when you're going into a sales call, like just do your research, have your notes ready, read the person's LinkedIn profile, see where they worked in the past, figure out what they just tweeted about, look at their
Mm,
company, see what their company's trying to solve for. Like just like do like 20 minutes of research before a, 50,000, 100,000 plus sales call, total contract value opportunity. Like do a little bit of research. You're going on stage, you're going to read a speech. I don't know, like read the speech like 3 or 4 times before you go on stage. What does that take you? An hour max? And if I like the preparation is it's such a insignificant amount. I mean, you can prepare more, but many people don't even do that. And they'll go into a call completely cold with no prep, or they'll jump onto stage and maybe they're not an experienced speaker and they'll just wing it. I mean, you're kind of setting yourself up for failure. So I found that if you do even like the bare minimum prep and you detach yourself from the outcome, like you said, shit always works out. That's been my experience. It's been very, very rare where I've put in a tiny bit of prep, detached myself from the outcome, and it hasn't worked out. And if I
mm.
put in, even twice as much prep, I'm sure it would go even twice as well. But obviously we have a lot of things going on in the day, but the point is like a little bit of prep. I love that. Detach yourself from the outcome and you'll be all right.
There's something to be said about the seeing the other team's playbook by doing a little bit of prep like that. Like I
Hmm.
described it as getting a viewpoint, a lens into their psyche. And so
Yeah.
that's what I mean by looking at the other team's playbook. If and that kind of implies that you're opposed to them as opposed to on the same side of them, on the same team as them. But if you can get an understanding of their decision-making process, then you can enter into that conversation that's already going on a lot more effectively, rather than trying to extract it on the call and then move into that ad hoc or post hoc. So
Yeah,
there's
dude. Because if you think about when you're being sold to, what feels good when somebody already understands what I'm dealing with, or when it feels like that sales
yeah,
rep is trying to pry information out,
right.
right? So if somebody says to me, "Hey, I just saw your company tweeted about this. You just had a big you just spent so much money on trade show floor booth in whatever in the UK, and it was a huge success. And I just saw you sent your whole team over there. How was that? Was that like, I don't know, think of some stupid conversation starter, but all of a sudden I'm like, shit, this guy took 5 seconds to figure out what I was doing last week with my company.
Mm.
And then you could talk about, hey, I saw you used to work at Oracle. Why'd you switch over? Like these are just like rapport building This is human. This is just
Yeah,
human stuff.
right.
The best sales reps do this already. The worst sales reps try and like pull these details out in this interrogation format on a
Yeah.
call or in person, and it's just awkward. The best sales reps don't even understand that they're really just good relationship
Mm,
builders
mm,
while understanding sales skills as well. And then when you get formally trained and you understand that like this is a way to build rapport and this is a way to find common ground and this is a way to not only just build rapport, but then you build trust and then you can ask deeper questions that can actually move the conversation along further or get more insight that if you have no rapport, you're not able to ask. At the end of the day, I came from sales. Not my whole life. A lot of my life was sales. A lot of the people I sold to, I was actually friends with by the end of the process because we spoke so much about just shit that's going on in their life, especially when it is a large deal and you spend a lot of time with this person and you're with this person not just for the first sale, but for the next year and the next rollout at the new office. And you spend so much time with this person. I mean, when you sit down with somebody 4, 5 times before a deal's done, you start to get to know them and you have coffee, you have a drink after the deal's done. And then 6 months from now, hey, we're rolling out a new office. We need you to deploy there as well. Okay, let's meet up and chat. And like you get to know these people because at the end of the day, B2B, B2C, it's all human to human. And I think people forget that too. And a little bit of research can sort of make everything go a little bit easier so that if you aren't a good rapport building person, you can architect it to a
mm.
degree. And that's
Yeah.
where the prep and the research and the pre-call stuff always comes in, or the pre-meeting stuff.
Right. And then, they spend more money if they're friends with you. If in the
Of
future they
course.
ever think about any of the topics that you do, they have that attachment to you in their minds. They think of you,
Yeah.
they go to you right away. They wouldn't even think about betraying that relationship because they've
No,
got
of
that
course.
loyalty that you're tapping into, right? So it's really a familial feeling that you're creating. And not like tactfully or like, manipulative, associate
No.
myself with love with this individual. It's not necessarily like that. It's a genuine human to human connection that you're just shooting the shit with, and you're building that relationship with one another, as opposed
I'll
to
tell.
salesperson selly
Yeah.
kind of a relationship, right?
Okay, so I'll tell you how real this is when you're selling to businesses. So some people who are listening to this may know what an RFP is, or an RFI, or an RFQ. It's request for proposal. RFI is request for information. RFQ is request for quote. But RFPs are for large deals. That's how a lot of B2B works. So a company will issue an RFP, a request for proposal, and it'll be huge. It'll be 20, 30 pages, and the answer will be 20, 30, 40, 50 pages, and it will document everything from who's in your company, what level of insurance do you have, what's the proposal, what's the cost, what's the solution, and like paragraphs and paragraphs of text. And at some levels in government, when they issue RFPs, it could be background checks of the employees that are going to be working on like it could get significant, right? Um, and if you're a certain size company, if you're publicly traded, if you're government, sometimes you're mandated when you're buying something to put out an RFP and get at least three options. So this is not something
Mhm.
that's nice to do. It's like a necessary. So when you play at that level, say a large company, a Fortune 1000, they'll issue an RFP for new security software. And then they'll have to get three responses, three bids, and they'll be due at a certain date and a certain time and a certain format. And if you miss that, you can't compete for the deal. So it's like that's next level sales. But what they don't tell you is it's not always the company that writes the RFP exclusively. It's not always the company that puts all the requirements as to what they need in this request for proposal. Many times they will use their most favorite customer
Oh, hell
that they've
yeah.
worked with for the past 10 years to help them write the proposal. And the customer will help them write the proposal and only include
Mm.
things that this customer is specifically tailored or able to do. It could be it could be they only have access to certain software or certain vendor relations or certain price points or something. But if you are a favorite customer, they will not all the time. I'm sure there's instances in government where it's highly illegal, but in private industry, for sure, they will ask their favorite customer to help them write the proposal. And then they will send the proposal that their customer helped them write to that customer, along with two others. Now, is there a chance that they go with someone else? Of course, there's a chance. It doesn't really happen that often. So the point is,
Mm.
you want to build that relation to the point where you are the advisor to the extreme where you are actually telling the company exactly what they need to ask for.
Mm.
And that is that is obviously a huge competitive advantage, but it could also be on a much smaller scale. If one company does a rollout with you for whatever product or service, they're going to trust you to advise them on their next rollout. They're going to
Yeah.
trust you to advise them on what they have to do for their next office. Um, and there's so many different industries, but that is the ultimate level of trust when you are there's a couple different sales methodologies, right? There's like spin selling and there's the challenger methodology, but I've always liked the challenger methodology because what the challenger methodology is for sales is you are not just selling a product or service. You are actually not even just advising the customer on what to do. You're challenging what the customer knows because you are
Mm.
such an expert at what you do. The customer is smart, obviously, but you are pushing back because you see holes in their argument. To be able to have that level of candor when you speak to somebody means you have to have a level of trust that is beyond, because obviously that could to a degree offend somebody. But if they trust you enough that if they say, this is a research we've done and this is what we want to buy, and you say, actually, No, you
Mm,
cannot do that because of reason A, B, C, X, Y, Z. That level of trust is incredible. I mean, these are when you actually become like good friends with the person you're doing business with, or the person within the organization you're doing business with. But that is the level that you should aspire to, where you challenge the customer because you know that if you let them do what they're doing, they're going to be worse off than if you engage and you challenge them and you point them in the right direction.
and even just the fact of challenging them builds that relationship with them too. At the end of the day,
It
even if it's
does.
at the beginning of the relationship, depending on the individual, some people
Yes.
like, like the head hardy CEOs, they're not challenged a lot. A lot of people are just, oh yes, yes, sir, whatever, So they respond very well from my experience to challenge,
I found that too. I
you
found that
know?
most people, there's another great salesperson, Oren Klaff. His book is behind me. It's called Pitch Anything, and he actually teaches how to position yourself in a capacity where you have the ability to be that expert and to control the conversation.
Mm,
And he's done it. I mean, he raises money for a living, but he's raised billions in capital. And he will do this with billionaires because he understands that, like, listen, these people are so used to having power, and he calls it framing, but he framed himself as somebody who should be asserting authority over an individual who has a massive amount of
mm,
authority. And I'm not going to teach it. You can go read the book, but it's a very useful skill. It commands a ton of respect. Obviously, it has to be done and a little bit of research. We're going off on a tangent here. A little bit of research is a great first step because if somebody does not believe you know anything about their business, they're never going to trust you, let alone let you challenge their assumptions. But when you get to that point, that is true sales. That is what sales should be. I'm assuming most sales is not like that, but that is what sales should be because then you can actually, first of all, for sales to be like that, you also have to be a subject matter expert and you have to be an ethical person because you're not just trying to sell the highest ticket item, you're
right.
selling what they actually need. But when you do that, the reputation you build is phenomenal. And that will make you more money than squeezing an extra 5 to 10% out of any customer.
Mm. I think we leave it at that, man. That's an interesting way
All right.
to leave it. Because you're talking about first of all being able to analyze an individual and understand that they will respond positively to something like that, and then to be able to tactfully pull it off while leveraging your expertise in the subject. And it's not to prove them wrong; it's to show them that you care enough to make a suggestion that's counter to what they originally thought. And then, because of that proving that you care, that again solidifies the relationship. And if it's not a done deal yet, that can oftentimes push them over the edge because everybody else they talk to is, oh yeah, we can do that for you. We can do that. You were
Yeah.
the creative one that understood what they wanted and found a better way of getting there and then proved that to them. And from my experience, they're like, okay, let's go with this guy because I actually like his solution better than what I pitched to the other guys. If you can pull off that
100%.
reframing properly. Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's interesting, bro. It's all about relationships at the end of the day. And
Amen.
yeah, beautiful, dude. So I had fun with you, man. Anything you want to add before we kick this off? How do people find you, your podcast? What do you want to plug?
Yeah. So if you want to learn more about entrepreneurship, sales, marketing, mindset, basically everything we spoke about today, that's what I do for a living too. You're a great interviewer. It was a lot of fun. I appreciate you bringing me on, but I have a podcast too. So if you like podcasts, you can go check out the Success Story podcast. And if you can't find it, then it's successstorypodcast.com or all the socials are at Scott D. Clary. So that's super simple.
Perfect. Anything to sell? What if somebody built so much rapport over you for this last hour and a half, and they're like, "Damn, how can I give this guy money? What's the pathway for that?"
If someone wants to give me money, well, I don't sell a lot. One thing I run right now is I run a private members community for late
Mm,
stage and exited entrepreneurs. So
mm,
if that is something, and that's in the past year and a half, I've brought in a lot of people from my own show that I built relationships with
yeah.
into this community. So if you want to be networking with people that have sold businesses for over 100 million. We have one woman who sold for over 1 billion, and some like relatively notable names
Mm.
that have part of this community. This is what I built out, and we meet 4 times a year. So that would be jointhesocialclub.com, and that would be the other thing that I actually sell. But outside of that, everything else is free.
Beautiful, man. Gives me something to aspire to, maybe we'll see how far I can get, and maybe one day I will
Hey man, let's
join
do it.
the ranks.
Yeah.
All right, Scott, brother. I had a pleasure with you, man. And we will
Likewise.
talk soon, dude. I appreciate you. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you, man.
All right, man. Ciao. All right. I hope you enjoyed that podcast episode. And if you want to get a free copy of my book, go to kylesbook.com and you can get a copy there. I'll talk with you soon.